And as we heard earlier today, a critical part of addressing this issue is changing the narrative. So we have Natalie Slater moderating this panel. Natalie is a second-year graduate student in our Environmental Humanities program. She's a Mellon Fellow. Our program has a grant from the Mellon Foundation to focus on community-engaged research. And for Natalie's project, she has partnered with Art Access, which focuses on art and disability justice. And so she's created a project called Embodied Ecologies, which is focusing on the intersections of environmental health, environmental justice, and disability justice. And we asked Natalie to moderate this because we think this project she's doing is a great example of changing the narrative. She'll have an exhibit up at the Salt Lake City Public Library and the Marriott Library this fall, and Great Salt Lake is a big focus of that project. So I'm going to turn it over to Natalie. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much for that, Brooke. Yes, just to plug the installation, it goes up next Saturday, October 1st at 4:30 in the main branch of the Salt Lake City Public Library. So we'd love to see you there. I'll start by briefly introducing all of these panelists. The first person is actually one of the artists in the Embodied Ecologies group. Victoria Meza is a mental health professional with a strong background in working with her local Native community. Her cultural background includes Navajo, Assiniboine, Sioux, Peruvian ancestry, and she's interested in exploring intersectional identities as she continues in her career. In addition to being an advocate for accessible mental health care, Victoria is passionate about working with Native students to overcome systemic barriers and help them achieve their educational and professional goals. Aside from her current position at the Urban Indian Center, Victoria is working artist with Art Access Utah for their project, Embodied Ecologies. She's excited to engage with challenging ideas and evolve her art practices through collaborating with others. Next in our panel, we have Lauren Gustus, who became the executive editor of the Salt Lake Tribune in the fall of 2020. The Tribune is the only major metro news organization that has become a nonprofit. The Tribune also achieved sustainability in 2021 under Lauren's leadership. Under her leadership, the Tribune became a founding member of the Great Salt Lake Collaborative, a group of 23 organizations focused on elevating solutions to the lake's challenges. Lauren previously worked for McClatchy as West Region Editor, overseeing 10 news organizations in Idaho, Washington, and California, including the flagship Sacramento Bee. Lauren has also served as an editor in Reno, Nevada, as well as in Colorado, where her work on transparency contributed to a new law that facilitated greater access to public records. Utah is a homecoming for Lauren, who met her husband while working as a reporter at the Tribune in the early 2000s. The couple and their 2 young sons enjoy camping, skiing, and mountain biking. Next in our panel, we have a familiar face, Darren Parry, who is the former chairman of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation. Darren serves on the board of directors for the American West Heritage Center in Wellsville, Utah, the Utah State Museum Board, the Community Advisory Board for the Huntsman Cancer Institute, the Utah Humanities Board, and the PBS Utah Board of Directors. He attended the University of Utah and Weber State University and received his bachelor's degree in secondary education with an emphasis in history. Darren is the author of The Bear River Massacre, a Shoshone history, and teaches Native American history at Utah State University. His other passions in life are his wife, Melody, their 7 children and 14 grandchildren. His other passion is his tribal family. Darren wants to make sure that those who have gone before him are not forgotten. Last but not least, we have Meisei Gonzalez, who is an environmental justice activist and a communicator based in Salt Lake City, Utah. Meisei has worked and collaborated with various nonprofits, coalitions, and elected officials in finding solutions to Utah's environmental threats that incorporate safeguarding and benefiting communities of color. He graduated from the University of Utah in 2020 and currently oversees communications for Heal Utah. Meisei also helps guide a wellness liaison program in collaboration with the University of Utah, Alliance Community Services, and the Kearns Library. Maybe a quick round of applause. Yeah, and what an impressive bunch of people. Quite a list. I really wanted to open this panel by just sort of grounding us in this conversation in all of your personal relationships with the Great Salt Lake. So I was hoping that you could tell us a brief anecdote about a core memory that you have with the Great Salt Lake, and then how this experience informs your relationship with and commitment to the lake today.
Thank you very much, Natalie. A connection that I have to the Great Salt Lake is as an artist. Coincidentally, I was in my final year of university. I was an art minor, and we were talking about environmental arts. And I remember learning about the spiral jetty for the first time and how that came to be, and the different processes that it's gone through and how it's become over time. And it was right before the pandemic started, so I didn't go while I was in that class, but it was a little bit after that, after I graduated, that I felt very drawn to it because it was such an important piece of art and because of what it meant to me as an artist. And so I remember taking the trek one day with a close friend, and it was really powerful, actually. Like at the time it was like, yeah, okay, sure, it's a great way to spend like a Saturday morning, but being there and experiencing the lake nearby and experiencing the piece of artwork that was there really helped me to see how important it is to elevate artist voices, because I don't think the spiral jetty is talked about enough, and neither is Great Salt Lake. And so talking about environmental art is something that that really helped me understand what I could do more.
Thanks. Well, I'm a journalist and always talking about length and how long our stories are, too long. So I will be short for the most part. I took my boys, 5 and 8, to the lake with a neighbor boy in February of this year. So it was a good time to go. It was not crowded. We bred up on brine shrimp. We brought buckets. We tried to catch them. We brought them a lot of dead brine shrimp. Apologize. I think they were dead when we caught them. We, stopped the car to look at buffalo, and we took a great hike, which in my book is no whining. And the boys still talk about it. They still talk about the best day ever, which is the day that they went to Antelope Island. And they did question my logic when I told them it was an island, right? Because it didn't look like it on the way out, which is a concern, right? We'll talk more about that, I'm sure. But it's a special place for them, and therefore now a special place for me. And we're documenting the economic and environmental impacts of what's happening at the lake, at the Tribune. But I would say the pull is emotional, and I feel grateful for that. That's a special thing.
Thank you. My earliest recollections of the Great Salt Lake was going to the very north end of the arm of the lake near Promontory. Our people have 2 wintering spots, one at Bear River outside of Preston, Idaho, because of the hot springs. The other wintering place was in Promontory, and which is real close proximity to the lake. But I remember as a young boy going on plant walks with my grandmother and her. It was a walk scene because she would sing the songs of the plants. And when I read Robin Wall Kimmer's book, I thought, did she steal this from my grandmother? Because my grandmother knew the songs of the plants before I read it in her book. But it reminded me of going on plant walks with my grandmother. And she talked to me about the importance of the plants and what they were used for, food or medicine, or both. And so that was my earliest recollections of the lake, and how the lake was there to nourish those plants, but also nourish us. And She taught me water songs, which I'm glad I don't have my drum because you'd make me play it and sing one. But she taught me to look at the environment in a different way. She talked about our plant and animal kinfolk. As I mentioned earlier in the earlier thing, that requires a different relationship with the plants and the animals when we think of them as our kinfolk, our relatives. And so that would have been my early recollection of the Great Salt Lake and the importance of it and the importance of the things that surround it.
So earlier this month, I went to the Great Salt Lake for work. I do a lot of like video stuff, so I went there for content. And while initially that was like the plan of what I was going for work, I think I also was just going like subconsciously for myself to reconnect and to take a moment at the Great Salt Lake. Working in social justice and environmental issues can be really exhausting. I'm pretty sure all of us have felt that, where we're constantly fed a lot of this negative news and just what's going on around the world. So for me, healing and taking a moment is just connecting outside. So while I went for work, I also just sat and just had a moment to myself, and it was really peaceful, but also really alarming, which was really interesting because I'm watching this really beautiful sunset, which if you guys have not gone to see a Great Salt Lake sunset, definitely put that on your bucket list. It's so beautiful. And in front of me is this beautiful scenery that I'm just enjoying, like, you know, sound, a few birds chirping, but then behind me is the dry lake bed. And it just showed me how much we've neglected and we've abused the planet. So it was a very interesting moment that I felt. And it also reminded me of the other moments I've had growing up where I came from a family that didn't have much income or access to like other different types of activities. We were a big family, so going out to the movies, that would have been a fortune for us to go out. So we went to places like the Great Salt Lake, and being there earlier this month reminded me of just how much it's given to us and gave me that kind of sense of fire of going back and saying, okay, I want to give back to the Great Salt Lake. It's given so much to us.
Thank you all. Yeah, it's really lovely to hear a bit more about you as people in addition to the important work that you do. But yeah, jumping right into the conversation that we're hoping to have here today. You know, we're all gathered to talk about different ways that we can advocate and communicate about the Great Salt Lake. And I'd love to hear your opinions about what narratives you think have a bit too much attention placed on them and what narratives you think need a little bit more attention. Maybe we'll start with Lauren.
Okay. So let's see, a few years ago now, the Tribune became a nonprofit, was kind of like wrested from a hedge fund, became a nonprofit, and we said, okay, well, what changes? What looks different for us? And we started to talk a little bit more about solutions, right? And I think that's appropriate in this context, in that we could write stories all day about what the lake level is. And you've probably read those stories in the Tribune and in other news media. And at the same time, there's a real opportunity to share practical, actionable news and information with people. So just this week, I believe it's Salt Lake City, it may be the county, don't quote me, is making available a seed that I'm not a scientist, but it came from USU that uses 30% less water that homeowners can plant, you know, and the first batch that they put out for sale at a deep discount sold out like that, right? So this is like round two, it's 1,000 bags. If you want to go get it, you know, go find them after. You know, we've written about how homeowners can flip their strips. We've written about how the city of Salt Lake is looking to move its secondary water straight into the lake. How the legislature, which is a challenging place to get anything done, right? I want to say more, I won't say more. Is getting into the game, right? Last year, they allocated what, 40 million? We still can't measure, right, how much water we use in the ag space. That's deeply concerning, right? But we can now let our water rights, not that I have one, go into the Salt Lake without risk of losing those water rights. And that's a big deal when you think about the tributaries that feed into the lake, right? So how do we elevate solutions? So in January of this year, we founded the Great Salt Lake Collaborative, which includes 23 organizations, 17 of them are media, including media that previously and still competes with each other. So the Deseret News and the Tribune are partners on this initiative to write about solutions. And so you can find us. There's the PSA on Instagram, Great Salt Lake, and at greatsaltlake.org. You know, we hope that you will continue to share those solutions, right? Because every one of us has an opportunity to affect a degree of change at whatever level we think is appropriate or that we can. Where would you like me to go?
Oh, no, sorry, if we go.
Yeah.
Couple thoughts. I think what's missing from the whole narrative of this is marginalized voices. We've never had a seat at the table my whole life. My grandmother told me once, Darren, no one has ever wanted to hear our story before. One day you'll have to make them listen. But I've never had to make anybody listen. But the point I'm trying to make is, when I said earlier, we didn't cause this problem as Native leaders, but we've never been invited to the table to solve the problem either. And so I have a next door neighbor that's a legislator. And I'm saying, I said to him the other day, really? You guys are really going to fix this? You guys can't fix anything. And I said, how do you fix it without hearing from the people that manage what you've screwed up for thousands of years? And so missing is those marginalized voices. I think what we're relying on is too much science. And I want you to just keep this in mind. Science is absolutely needed, but this is such a complex problem. I'm going to say it for the second time, that all the science in the world isn't going to solve our selfish behaviors as people. And so when we start changing our own mindsets and how we use water and how the things we plant in our yards, and even though we're the minority user of water in the state, we still need to do our part to make sure that our selfish behaviors isn't part of the problem. Because at the end of the day, something that we can't measure today is climate change. That's something that is the elephant in the room that we don't know. That's the part we don't know. But we need to be doing everything we can individually to make sure our selfish behaviors isn't causing part of the problem. What we're doing at Bear River, by putting more water into the system, I mean, a lot more water. I hope it gets there. My farming friends say it won't get there because we have no way of measuring the use. And he said that will be used way before it even gets there. And so, gosh, a part of me is so hopeful that we're going to get to the root of this. But there's a part of me that's a little bit skeptical sometimes, because we need to change our behaviors. We need to completely change the way we do water laws. And we need to figure out a way to meter it and to make sure we're all just taking our little share and making it be something that we have to pay for. I mean, I live in the Cache Valley. I live in Avon, south end of Cache Valley. I am surrounded by alfalfa growers. And my neighbor has 800 acres of alfalfa. He doesn't have one cow. He ships all of his alfalfa to China.
Or something.
Yeah, and he sends it to China. But and then he waters the crap out of it in the middle of 3 days of a rainstorm because he doesn't want to lose his water right. And well, that stuff makes me nuts. And so until we change our thinking and the way we do things, man, there's not a lot of hope. But I think there is a lot of hope because I think we can change. But we're gonna have to rely on the legislature a little more than I've wanted to in the past. Let me say that.
So, yeah, that's not always. I did definitely want to like expand on what Darren was talking about marginalized voices. Historically, Black, Brown, Indigenous communities have felt and have been forced to deal with higher levels of climate change impacts. This is due to a variety of things, but there has been a lack of regulations and safeguards to make sure that people are put over profit. And what I'm worried about is with this history context is as the Great Salt Lake continues to dry and we're seeing these different environmental impacts, we might see that repetition of that history. What we've seen earlier today with from LA, how Owens Lake was very devastating to different communities. And while we don't have that much data here in Utah of how exactly this toxic elements are going to affect our air quality and then our health, we do have data showing PM 2.5, ozone, and wildfire pollution and their health impacts and how those different air pollutions have disparities. So again, I'm very cautious and very worried about that same thing happening with the toxic dust. Again, there's been past and current research efforts to point these disparities, and I hear a lot of this argument of like, well, why make this about race? It affects everyone, right? Air quality. But I'm always pointing to there's complex disparities within communities that have led to what's going on right now. I've been hearing this quote a lot, and I've been kind of quoting it a lot. Climate change isn't racist, people are. Like that's the reality, and that's what got us to where we are. So I really do think that there's not enough conversation about fully understanding how this is going to affect our health as a state, but also who's going to be given the burden of the highest impacts. And I truly believe that and advocate for the inclusion of frontline communities to be included in not only conversations like today's, which are very important, but also when making regulation and policy. So I'm talking up at the Hill, there needs to be more inclusion of voices who are being impacted. And by including these voices, we can ensure that whatever solution we look for is not going to be put and jeopardizing communities of color and expanding climate change inequity. So that's one thing I definitely want to highlight.
And yeah, thank you to my fellow panelists. And I wanted to expand upon all of their remarks regarding marginalized voices and Black, Indigenous, people of color communities by addressing the disabled community, which is what Embodied Ecologies, the art project that I'm a part of, is focused on. And that's why we're working with Art Access, is because disabled communities, look, there's something that one of our artists said when we were first meeting, is that disabled communities are the last people think of when they think advocacy, when they think rights and accessibility. And I think that in addition to listening to what our lower income and racial disparity, what they all have to say, I think that disabled communities really do need to come first, especially with this, because of the health impacts and because of the stresses that they are facing, in addition to considering what the effects of the shrinking Great Salt Lake are having.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a few of you touched on the work that you're doing to specifically elevate the stories of the communities or the types of stories that you think are underrepresented. But I was wondering if you could all expand a bit on the specific tools that you're using to add nuance and to complicate some of these dominant narratives. One's down again, Darren.
People will always forget facts and figures about history and climate change, but I believe they'll never forget how they felt when they hear a story. I'm a storyteller. My grandmother was a storyteller. She disseminated knowledge, values, everything I learned as a young boy at the feet of a grandmother who told me stories. She'd use the bald eagle. She'd use the coyote. They all spoke English. They all walked on 2 feet. But through those stories, these values and a sense of who I was going to be and who I wanted to be came to life. And I knew I didn't want to be the greedy porcupine. But those I'll tell you after. But those stories resonated with me, and they gave me a feeling. If she would have gave me numbers, 70% of everybody that's selfish is going to end up in prison, that wouldn't have meant anything to me. But hearing the stories and being able to disseminate knowledge and values through storytelling is, for me, the way I've been able to do it. And I think people like it. I think they'll remember it. And there's something about changing who you are when something's tugging at your heartstrings or tugging at your soul. And that's where you affect real change, to me, is when you can really get inside someone and affect their soul, because that's what it's going to take. So for me, communicating in that storytelling narrative is by far the best way. And frankly, it's the only way I know. But I'm very grateful for a grandmother who taught me those values.
It's a really cool story. I would also like to know why you're not porcupine. In my work, I use a lot of digital platforms, specifically social media platforms. I grew up in that era where it kind of consumed my life, basically. And I use these platforms because I know how important of a tool they are to promote awareness regarding various different issues at a really fast way to a lot of people really quick. Like, we've all seen viral videos and how their impact has done. And I think I became really aware of just how powerful these social media tools can be used during what happened in 2020 with different social justice movements. We saw an overwhelming support for Black Lives Matter, and we saw just how powerful that tool was to not only organize, but bring awareness and to bring justice to different issues. So I use a lot of that platform, but I also know that it can be dangerous. Social media is pretty new, where we don't have all the regulations and safeguards that should be put in place to make sure it's not used in a negative light. We probably all have also seen some false news. I remember seeing an Onion article my first time. I was like, how is this real? And now it's like a meme. That's an Onion article. But there's a lot of danger in social media for that false news and how the tools can be used to do negative in a movement. I've seen cases where they've used like social media advertising to advertise the wrong date for election polls at specific communities. So it can be used in a really negative light, but I also know that it can be used in a lot of positive. And I kind of give always advice for organizations and people who want to use a platform to use as much sourcing and transparency, because if you're hiding something, then there's a reason why you're hiding it, right? So that's kind of what I see with social media.
So I'm going to touch upon what we've been referencing, embodied ecologies, in addressing the work of protecting the Great Salt Lake. I really like art. I think it's a powerful way to communicate different ideas in conventional ways. But like Darren was saying, like, if you can tell a story or share something that really reaches someone else's soul, that's really powerful and that resonates with them, and that helps them to feel those same things and to have a desire, even, so that will plant that seed. And I think that art itself is something that isn't valued enough in mainstream culture, or it's underfunded too. And I think that does our culture a great disservice, And I think that leaves a lot of people out of the conversation where we are, the mainstream culture does rely upon experts who are good at writing, good at numbers. And those are important tools, I think. But people who communicate better through art are just as valid. And they have important ideas, and they have just as much of a right to communicate those ways in the best way that they know how, as people who can give an hour lecture or understand stats really well.
We could talk about social media for hours, but I think we're on the wrong, or at least I'm on the wrong panel for that. At the Tribune and through the collaborative, we focused a lot on visuals, which is in alignment, I think, with what you're saying, right? In that it can be really powerful when you see, from above, for example, what it looks like, and you can do the stagger, right? Like, here's what the lake looked like 20 years ago, here's what it looks like now. And we know across the board in journalism that if you have a strong visual, people are more likely to engage with your reporting or your storytelling, right? And so there are a number of photos that just come to mind that our team has taken. One of a chair in the Great Salt Lake. It's a very comfy chair. It looks like an arm chair. I don't know why it's there, but it's kind of this iconic chair, right? And the spiral jetty with water, right, is also another memorable one and historic maybe. And so we look to try to be mindful with our visuals as we look at the tools that are effective for us. In the collaborative, for the first time ever, we're sharing news across 17 organizations, right? So if KSL wrote a story, 16 other news organizations would pick it up. So the power of perhaps that personal storytelling is amplified times 17 in theory, right? If all of those organizations picked it up. So that's been very helpful as well, because there's just more opportunities for people to see that reporting, right? We focus on high utility, as I said before. So here's what you can do. Here's a way that you can help. Here's how you can write to your legislator and tell them how you feel, and so on and so forth. And then in the solutions vein, I would just add one other thing. We've talked some about Owens, and we have a reporter who just got back from Owens, who's going to share the perspective that she gleaned in terms of what's working, what isn't, as well as mono or mono. If anyone wants to tell me which is correct, I would deeply appreciate it. And what worked and didn't work there. So what's working elsewhere, and how can we bring that to Utah, right? Or to our challenges has also been a helpful tool.
So it's almost time to turn the questions over to the audience. But before we do that, I wanted to ask a question sort of on behalf of the audience. We're all here supposedly because, we want to learn how to take in narratives about the Great Salt Lake that are challenging the dominant narratives, that are nuanced and intersectional and centering marginalized voices. For members of the audience, what advice do you have on, finding that type of story? And we'll start. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would definitely recommend you to continue what you're doing. You're showing up to events like this, taking the time of day to educate yourself and to learn about these different issues. And I also would recommend you to look into maybe different angles of history. We've known that BIPOC history has been erased in a lot of cases when it comes to environmental history, and environmental issues. So it'd be really, I just recommend to just broaden that and to look and educate yourself on these different history and angles. So that's kind of my little recommendation.
Yes, I would recommend just learning from people that are different from you. I think, artists like going to Embodied, like for me, this is like a huge comfort, but also just really paying attention when different types of information are presented. I think that I spend a lot of time on social media, and I make an effort to follow people that Oh, yeah, sometimes, yeah, it's looking for people that you agree with, but also looking for people that share the useful information, even though it's uncomfortable. And seeking out marginalized voices because they're out there and they are sharing what they know and they're sharing who they are. And I think that that's really courageous of them. And I think that they're worth listening to.
I'd ask you to encourage others to follow trusted sources of local news and information, totally biased. After the ledge, we published a story that looked at the communication between water lobbyists and lawmakers. There were clear points at which bills changed. And there's a lot of people working for the status quo, right? And so to the extent that you can know more about how that works, by following trusted sources, I would strongly recommend that.
Yeah, we could talk all day about that. But stay active, stay involved, and learn as much as you can about the whole thing. There are no easy answers here. I wish there was. The low-lying fruit to me is my neighbors that have all the alfalfa. That's easy. But it's complicated. I just moved to Avon, bought an acre, and they said I have 2 water shares. So I said, so what does that mean? Well, do you have the Paradise water shares or do you have the Highline water share? I said, I don't know. So I found out. And they said, well, if you have the Paradise, you're twice as better off because you get twice as much water than if you were to have the other one. I said, so what's 1 share mean? Well, somebody explained it to me like if you have 1 sprinkler head running 24/7, you could run that 1 sprinkler head for all week long. That's 1 water share. And I just got thinking, this is crazy. They can't even tell me what my water share is. But if I had another one, it would be twice as much water. And I said, who polices this? Nobody. Nobody. Well, that's the problem. So if you think about that and think about the work we have ahead, which is daunting, it seems, but I absolutely believe we can get there. But advocate for voices that have never been heard to be on this team. Call the governor's office and say, you know what, you should put Darren on this water board or whatever. I think they need to start hearing from voices they've never heard before and see how that resonates with them. So grateful to be a part of this. You know?
Yeah.
Well, I hope that everyone leaves and calls the governor and says, put Darren on. That's our action item of the day. Does anyone have questions?
Okay, can you explain why we can't measure the water? I'm from California. It seems like we do that there, although I could be wrong.
I'm gonna do my best, not
Okay.
perfect. So it takes a tremendous degree of infrastructure, right, to measure water. I used to live in California, and while I lived there, they put a water meter on my home. We were so excited, right? But they tore up the whole neighborhood to do it, every single street. They tore up our lawn, which was fine. They then gave us 2 years worth of grace period so we could compare our bill to what it would be when we were being metered, right? So they've really eased us in. And Utah hasn't paid for that infrastructure, right? Bottom line, yeah, either on homes or in ag. And it's hard in ag, harder than hooking a meter up, I think, although I'm not an expert, to a house. Now, there is some money in the budget to study how much it would cost to add meters. And I think that meters ultimately can come to Utah, but we're years off just due to the infrastructure that it would take to make it happen.
Any other? Since we're discussing action items, I wanted to give a pitch for everyone to get a subscription to the Salt Lake Tribune. Because they are doing amazing journalism and they need to be supported. So if you don't have a subscription, please get one and think of it also as Christmas presents. I think we probably have time for 2 more questions. Does anyone have another thought?
So I guess my question is, like, again, kind of related to action steps. I'm in Summit County, or my parents are in Summit County, and they have been fighting our area service board about like getting meters on wells because we have multiple neighbors that are like using up all of our groundwater for like a lavender farm or something. Like, what, if any, steps can we have? Like, my parents have gone to, you know, the local government, like the service area board, the county, and like nothing is getting done. Do you all know of like anything that like the average person can do to like have, like, to get it on? Like, they're using like our water because they're overwatering so much. Like, it's just like, what resources do like the average person have, I guess, is my question.
Sure. What's your name?
My name's Darren.
Thank you. I don't know, but I should say, and thank you for the story idea. I mean, I think we, sincerely, not the lavender farm, which we could also look into, but the idea that there should be some sort of guide. What can you do? How do you communicate with local government in a way that can be effective such that, you know, you get some degree of resolution? I mean, that's something that we could absolutely put together. It's a great idea.
Okay.
Thank
Like, we're happy to report to people that are watering their lawns when it's raining.
But like, so there is a public shaming campaign, right? I mean, you could do that.
But like nothing's happening. It's just, yeah, I'm very curious about it.
Anyone else? Sure.
You know, one thing I've learned from the systems is they're really slow,
Okay.
but if you organize enough, like with other people, they start to really listen. And when you put them kind of on blast, kind of how she's speaking, putting them in the stories and really holding them accountable, because a lot of these councils and committees are doing this work with no eyes on them. They're just doing it thinking no one's looking at this. I'm just gonna, there's no purpose. I've been to some where I'm the only one sitting there and I'm like, wow. So bringing your family to that council meeting, bringing other people, and just, you have to kind of keep on top of it, which is really frustrating with the system. But I have seen some movement. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, that reminds me, again, not helpful, but we're going to, we haven't yet made a public announcement on this, but we have found support, financial support funding to send civic documenters to water meetings across the valley, starting in January. So that we can go to those meetings, right? So that there are eyes on local electeds from water board all the way on up, right? So that, you know, everybody has visibility into what's happening. So we have a lot of details to work out. We're pretty excited that we'll get that going in January.
I mean, I guess it's like really, sounds really basic for like our generation. I don't want to consider myself a cuss, but but like you're sharing your story on social media too, like everyone has kind of been saying, like, you have to really share your story that other people will resonate with, and that will gain support, that will gain that movement that you're looking for, because yeah, like everyone else has been saying, if when more eyes are on them, like they don't want the negative press.
Awesome. Final question.
So it sounds like a big theme that's been talked about in this panel is community and community engagement. And a lot of you are really involved in the community here in Salt Lake City. I was just wondering if you could give some community groups that support the work that you do, or you feel proud to represent this ongoing theme of community engagement and the Great Salt Lake.
So a little harmful, like selfish plug, but I work with Heal Utah, the Healthy Environment Alliance of Utah. We're an environmental policy nonprofit I definitely would recommend you to look into. I also have had the great opportunity to work with Save Our Great Salt Lake, which you will get to hear that from panelists in just a little bit. And as well as kind of expanding out of just the environmental world. I'm not gonna lie, here in Utah, it's a little behind with BIPOC-led environmental groups. But the issues are still there, and we're still talking about all these issues. It's just not in a public-facing environmental group. So looking into supporting like BIPOC-led groups, maybe they're like Alliance Community Services, which works with like immigration issues. They also talk about these environmental things. Maybe they're not so public, but those are just a few that I can kind of look into, and definitely just check out as many BIPOC as possible.
Art Access, they work with the disabled community and they're supporting Embodied Ecologies. I would also say Natalie Strong. They are a wonderful nonprofit that a couple of my friends are involved with that elevate Navajo voices. As well as Diva Salt Lake City. It's a nonprofit. It's based in Salt Lake, and it elevates BIPOC voices. And then keep an eye out. Oh, Utah and Anikea, they also a native-led organization that started by protecting bear zoos, but has expanded to other environmental causes in the state of Utah.
We have gotten a ton of insight from Bonnie and her team at Westminster. So if you're not checking out what they're doing, please do. Thanks, Bonnie and team. Utah Film Center is a partner in our collaborative, and they're doing some interesting things. The public libraries are also a great partner in hosting a number of upcoming events for the collaboratives and working to elevate theme stories art from. So it's hard for us to align with advocacy groups because we try to stay, straight. So yeah, that's harder for us. We can elevate multitudes of perspectives, but in terms of alignment, that's a little bit more difficult.
All right, thank you so much. So as a encapsulation, we'll all be reminding our governor's vote and for Darren, we'll all be following all of the groups on social media. Maybe we'll assemble that list and can email it out to you in our after note. And everyone will be coming to the public library on October 1st to see some of Victoria's beautiful, beautiful art. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you to our amazing panelists. We have a break right now. Please be back in here to start our next panel at 2:20, which is titled "Can Art Save Us?" Building on a lot of this conversation, we'll have various artists showcasing their work and talking about the role of art in this movement. So this panel is titled "Can Art Save Us?" and it's moderated by Denise